Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of RAW DMC, Raw, Real, Deep, Meaningful Conversations on the Truly Great Life podcast. I am your hostess with the mostest, Alana Yvonne, and I'm really excited for today's conversation with Penina Taylor. And you'll hear all about her in the introduction. And suffice it to say, I hope you stay for the whole conversation because there's so much wisdom and insight in our conversation from Penina. She is, one could say, an expert risk taker. She's done a lot of things that most people haven't and experienced a lot of different ways of looking at life, going through life that I think can be really beneficial for all of us to learn from and consider what it means for us in our own lives. So, just like with all of these conversations, look at it from the lens of what you're going through, who you are, where you are, what you were struggling with, what you're hoping for. And I hope that some of the wisdom shared here is helpful for you. Okay, let's begin. Hey, Penina, thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing this morning?
Hi there. Doing great, except it's 8 o'clock at night, so
You're
I've had a
totally
full day
right.
today. I'm in Israel. Yeah, no, it's
That's
okay.
right. I am like freshly showered out of the gate, ready to go. So I'm like, good morning. And you're like, I'm
Yep,
going to bed after this call. So
close.
that's really, that is so funny. So, hi, everybody joining us from Internet Land. I almost said La La Land, which could be Internet Land as well.
Yeah.
For those of you joining for the first time, I'm Alana Yvonne, Truly Great Life, and bringing to you another RAW DMC, which stands for Raw, Real, Deep, Meaningful Conversations with amazing people who have stories and messages from changes they've gone through, struggles they've overcome or overcoming. And the whole point of this is to be very, very relatable, approachable, understandable, so that you, dear listener or viewer, feels like you get something out of this that you can actually apply through the lens of your own life today, tomorrow, the next day, just to know like we are all in this together and you don't need to be polished and perfect and buffed and all dolled up unless you want to, but that there is a place for all of our voices and stories to really come out. And that is kind of the purpose of these. So I am super excited to introduce a new colleague and friend, Penina Taylor. Penina has lived a life marked by transformation, reinvention, and bold leaps of faith. From a secular Jewish upbringing to embracing Christianity in high school, then becoming a leader in the Messianic movement, and eventually embracing Orthodox Judaism alongside her husband, who converted, her personal journey has never followed a straight line. She's reunited divorced parents, emigrated to Israel without knowing the language, built new careers from scratch, and found success as a speaker, writer, and entrepreneur. When the pandemic brought everything to a halt, she launched an online magazine that quickly grew to over 50,000 monthly hits. Oh my God. And later pivoted into digital marketing, client success, and website design. Now, she and her husband are embarking on their next chapter, moving full time into an RV to explore the country while continuing to work remotely. Penina Taylor, welcome to Raw DMC.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you, Ilana.
I know, I really appreciate it. So, as I ask all of my guests, the first question is tell us a little bit about, I know I just gave a little bio there, but about your story, your journey that you feel would be, because I'll include in the notes the links to your other things that you've done. Um,
hmm
but what would you like to share with the audience today, with where you're at right now, about who you are and what you do?
It's a hard question, and I'm actually probably pretty glad that I didn't decide to write it all out beforehand. It was actually an oversight, but that's okay. Not having notes means that we'll probably have a much more interesting conversation because that's where the way things tend to go with me. There's just so many pieces of who I am, and the truth is that everybody is like that. Everybody's lives are multifaceted, but being a little bit older. I have definitely had more time to have all kinds of things happen in my life. So I feel like, I did have a message for a long time. I was speaking about my spiritual journey, which has not stopped. It has continued. Unfortunately, I don't feel uh, I don't feel that I'm in a place where I want to continue speaking as a spiritual role model in the Jewish community. And I mean, we could go there or not go there, it doesn't matter. But one of the things that I did do for very close to when we got to the beginning of COVID was I was in the process of transitioning from talking mostly about my spiritual journey from Christianity, from secular Judaism to Christianity to Orthodox Judaism, to talking about personal growth
Hmm.
and doing more of the inspirational, motivational, whatever you want to call it, kind of talking, because I do feel like that's something that hasn't changed for me. Um, I have been through so many things in my life, and uh, as a child, I endured abuse, and we don't need to get into the details of what that means, but I've then spent an entire lifetime working on trying to get my abusers out of my head, not letting them live rent free in my head, and
Right.
really trying to become a mentally healthy, emotionally healthy person. And I've done a lot of learning, both in the coaching and therapy direction of things, but also a lot of personal work so that I could gain back my own voice and really learn to live and not just to kind of make it from one day to the next with all of the trauma and all of the pain and everything that I was carrying along with me. So I feel like at this point in my life, if someone were to ask me, what what would you bring to the table if you were going to do a TED Talk, right? What would you talk about? And I really feel that learning to embrace life, not letting fear stop you, and the fact that it's never too late to change, to grow. My children think I'm absolutely crazy. I'm sure at some point we're going to get into what we're about to embark on. Where my husband and I are on this, like we're just like toes. We're almost there after Passover, which I don't know if this is going to air before or after Passover, but we're going to be embarking on this epic adventure that everybody thinks we're absolutely crazy to be doing. And I feel like the one thing that I kind of bring to the table, so to speak, is that all of my experiences point to just always being open and learning and curious and being willing to take risks. I don't mean like crazy risks. I mean, like a lot of us allow fear to stop us from doing things which are definitely within the category of reasonable, simply because we're afraid to, either we're afraid to do it or we're afraid of what other people will think for of us, which was a big thing for me with the Jewish community, because when I was trying to be a speaker in the Orthodox and really I mean, American version of ultra Orthodox community,
Hmm.
what people thought about me, how I dressed, how I covered my head, all of these things, like just mattered so very much. And I finally reached a point where I've learned that, I mean, not just learned in my head, but really, really grasped with who I am and my soul, the fact that the only person I have to answer to is my creator and my own self. And if people don't like who I am, then they're welcome to not listen, not hire me, not follow me, whatever. But so yeah, so I told you we were in for a wild ride when we talk because I'm all over the place. But I'm definitely, yeah, exactly. I'm definitely all about um, the importance of living life to its fullest. And that doesn't mean being irresponsible, but it does mean um, not letting fear stop you from doing things.
Okay, that was just like beautiful. And I'm already like so inspired by you. Okay, but I'm gonna go there. And if you don't want to go there, we don't have to go there. But
It's okay.
your spiritual journey clearly informed where you're at right now when you talk about not letting fear stop you, right? Is
Yeah,
that fair to
yeah.
say?
Oh, yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and even though it's changing form and who you're going to inspire or who your example is going to speak to and what you do with work, and to your point, um, that's really, really intense, right? Because I think speaking as um, I don't even know how to describe myself. I jokingly call myself an equal opportunity Jew, but
Mm.
like I, grew up conservative, I've been going to Chabad for 30 years. And to your point, I also, it's like just in the last really, it's been building up for a long time, but just in the last year and a half since October 7th, getting to this point of like, it is about me and my relationship vertically, right? It
Yeah,
is totally about me and my creator. It is totally about what I'm here, not in a narcissistic, selfish ego way. It's really
right.
about a calling. And how does that look for you in your own manifestation, right? In this Gilgul, in this iteration, in this incarnation, in this life that we're in right now. And so,
Yeah,
I would like to know a little bit more if you're okay with it. Like, tell me more
sure.
about what you think about God. You went from secular to Christianity to Messianic to Orthodox to wherever you're at right now, where it sounds like it's much more like I like to call it N of one, right?
Yeah.
Like, so can you just expand on that a little bit, please?
Sure, absolutely. I just want to say, and this like kind of speaks to what you were saying also, I really love the idea of not being able to be put in a box religiously, because I feel like boxes make things, they take all the work out of relationships. Like we, especially as Jews, we love boxes because if I can put you in a box, then I don't have to actually get to know who you are, because I can just, I know. Like, I mean, I make assumptions based on what box I've put you in, but it takes a lot of the work out of the relationship. And by being somebody who can't be put in a box, who doesn't fit in a box, and keeps people guessing all of the time, um, it means that in order to get to know me, in order to have any kind of relationship, you have to actually get to know me. I remember one time a handful of years ago, it's actually more than a handful now. I guess it's probably closer to 10. I was a guest speaker at a program called Limud. There's an organization that puts together these learning retreats, Jewish learning retreats. The one in England is a week-long retreat. The ones around the world in other places are usually, I think, weekends or something like that.
Hmm.
And the guy who put it together, I don't know if he's conservative or reform or what he is. He's definitely not Orthodox.
Right.
But his point was is that there's a tremendous amount of great learning to be had within Judaism. And you don't have to be Orthodox to be able to connect with your Jewishness, your Jewish soul, or even simply, even if you don't want to look at it on a spiritual level, just knowing the huge work of literature and knowledge that is Judaism. And regardless of how you observe, it is part of your birthright. So I was at this Limud thing, and at the time I was still at the height of my speaking career and very, very orthodox in not just my own observance, but my appearance. And in fact, I struggled very hard with how to dress for the program because I wanted people to be able to hear what I was going to say without how I dressed, putting a wall up before they even had a chance to hear what I had to say. And
Hmm.
so I felt like if I wore a scarf, that would be like too in your face. I'm a religious Jew. And so I wore a wig. And, silly me, I thought, oh, people who aren't religious probably wouldn't even realize it's not my real hair. Wrong. Doesn't matter how good a wig it is, everybody can tell what you're wearing. And so people were making assumptions about who I am, obviously. And that mean they weren't far off, except that people have a box called very orthodox. And if they look at you and you look like you're very orthodox, then you fit in that box and either you're safe or you're unsafe, right? Because that's what boxes tell us, right? On the
Hmm.
outside, safe or unsafe. Um, and and so I was walking down the hallway, and some woman stopped me, and she said to me, "What are you doing here?" And I looked at
Mm.
her like, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "I mean, look at you." And I just stopped for a second. I understood what she was saying. I can't remember if she said anything else. And I just looked at her and I said, "Are you making an assumption about who I am based on what I look like?" Would you like me to make assumptions about you based on what you look like, or would you prefer that I actually get to know you before I decide who you are? And of course, I mean, this was one of those few moments. I'm not one of those people who's really quick on my feet. So,
That sounds
I
pretty
don't,
quick.
I mean, I've only had two or three of those moments in my
Yeah.
entire life, sometime maybe I'll share the one that happened in South Africa, but,
Okay.
um, anyway, she was stunned. She didn't know what to say, and I just went, kept walking down the hallway. Um, but that also reminds me of one time I was speaking at I guess it was for a high school. One of my speaking tours, I was speaking for a high school, and afterwards, I always take questions. I have always done that. And one of the boys asked me, he said, you were a Christian for 16 years, and then and now you've been an Orthodox Jew. No, you were secular for 16 years, and then you were a Christian of one kind or another for 17, and now you've been an Orthodox Jew for however many years it's been. And what's to say that, in another 17 years, you won't come back and tell us that you're no longer Jewish,
Hmm.
or whatever. And I said, well, I don't think that's going to happen, but I hope, I hope that in 17 years, I will not be the same person I am standing here today talking to you. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I would be very sad if I was exactly the same person I am today. And so that's kind of informed my life either. I mean, I wouldn't say like consciously, it's been very unconscious. I kind of describe myself as a philosopher personality, that
Hmm.
I'm always, and also like, they talk about old souls and young souls, and I feel like I have a young soul. Like everything interests me. I'm a very curious person. I'm always wanting to learn. And one of the reasons, for example, that I hate politics is because even when I disagree with someone, I'm very good at putting myself in their shoes and trying to see where they're coming from and why they might have the opinions that they do.
Hmm.
And um, so what that means is that as a religious person, like a lot of people, when they find the truth with a capital T, they build their foundation, they build their house, they go inside, they settle in, and they're there until they die. And they're very happy with that because they like being settled, they like being solid, they like knowing that they know the truth, and that's great for them. But I've always been the kind of person who says, okay, um, you know, my religious point of view or the teachers that I've studied under say this, but other people say this, or science says this, or whatever. And rather than saying like why, I, what I tend to do is I say, okay, how both can't be true, or maybe they can both be true. How could they both be true? How is it that, the Bible says this and science says this, or the right wing people say this and the left wing people say this, or whatever. And so it's always leading me to look at other points of view and to challenge my own beliefs and my own points of view, and to be willing to change when I discover that there's a problem with what I believe, which is how I went from going from being a secular Jew to Christianity was just becoming aware of God, in my life, in the world and stuff like that. There were reasons why I was influenced, but going from Christianity, though, to Judaism was about trying to find the truth. And so there are a lot of people who are like, how could you have, you went through this incredible journey, you became an Orthodox Jew. How could you change what you believe again now, when you thought you found the truth with a capital T? And it's for me, it's like, okay, don't you understand that how I was able to go from Christianity to Judaism was that when I discovered new information that shed light on what I already believed, I was willing. I'm not the kind of person who keeps my heels, I dig my heels in. I'm the kind of person who says, okay, I thought this was truth. Now I realize that there's a lot of things that I didn't understand or I didn't know. Now that I have that additional knowledge, how does that change how I see the world now? And so, I'm always growing and always changing. And yes, I'm going to give you a vague answer because I don't like being put in a box. Um, I,
Definitely not trying to.
yeah,
What I, if I can, if I'm gonna push back a little here though, or ask
sure.
you to expand, because I think part of, when you talk about, we know in theory, don't judge a book by its cover, but the truth is people judge books by their cover all the time, right?
Absolutely.
People are going
Yeah,
to, we have limited information, we have limited time, maybe limited curiosity, limited motivation. And so to survive on some level, humans have developed this need to judge based on limited information in order to, like, to your point, is it safe, is it not safe, right? Is it secret, is it
right,
safe, is it okay to go, right? That's like,
right,
where do we go with this? And I think that also when it comes, and I can't quote any research here, but I think just anthropologically people have developed to signal with their clothes or their attire or their, their physical signals in culture where we present in a certain way, which sends a certain meta message or a certain message about who we are and what we maybe value. So I think within orthodoxy, with a lowercase o, right, any kind of religious sect, group, strength, is going to present, why do we have all these different kinds of hats or head coverings or dress, or is the collarbone, is the shoulder, there's so much, or, if you're secular, what are you wearing or how much are you
right,
exposing, right? So we send messages with what we wear. And I think that it's limiting. Of course there's a person behind what's being shown, but not everyone
right.
can get to that, like, I'd like to get to know you, right? Not everyone wants to get to know you, and so people will
Hmm.
generalize. And so how do you balance now? I know you had your online community of unorthodoxed, I think you said it was called,
Right,
right? So
right,
how do you balance that? Am I wearing, now we've got the head coverings that are like up to here, and they're very chic, they're very chic. At least in Israel, you've got women wearing these, my daughter who lives in Israel is like always taking my scarves back with her because she's playing around with when she I'm like, okay, take that.
yeah,
But then I see some who are looking a certain way, acting in a way that I'll just call it like, this is me. Like, I don't associate that with the behavior, let's say, or presentation
right,
that someone who dresses that way would act. There's a dissonance or a disconnect or something. So where is
right. A
that?
contradiction.
I don't even want to call it a contradiction. It could just be that I have a limited understanding or experience with people who dress like A, therefore represent A. And to add to that point, I remember learning years ago from I think it was a book by Dennis Prager 100 years ago, like in the
Hmm.
80s or something, that I read about Judaism
Uh,
or something, like the 9 questions or whatever. I think he wrote it
mm,
with Telushkin, but there was this thing about the commandment of not taking the Lord's name in vain, right? This
hmm.
idea of not and if I remember correctly, it was explained rationally as, understand that if you're wearing, let's say, a kippah, not
Hmm.
you, although there are women now who are
No, no.
whatever,
Yeah,
but if
yeah.
someone's wearing a kippah, it sends a message about something related to their belief. And then if you see them going into like a non-savory shops, shall we say, like an area that clearly, I think his example was a porn shop, but like in New York in the 70s when you had all that. But if you see someone going into something that's clearly, that's taking God's name in vain, kind of, that's like a
Yeah,
disconnect.
I've
So
definitely heard, sorry.
no, so I'm just wondering, like, because I hear what you're saying about don't judge me by what I'm wearing, but we also recognize the power of communicating something in what we wear. And
Hmm.
especially when you wear the God clothes, let's say, or you're presenting a
Right.
message, not you, but anyone presenting a message of I am an Orthodox Jew. And I've heard some people describe it, I'd never heard this before, of like where you're holding at, right? How do you do
Yeah.
X if you're holding there? And it's like, whoa. So how do we balance, like, let's say someone is feeling called to cover their hair, but then they're doing something on TikTok that maybe is very traditionally not sneaked or modest. I
Right.
don't know. This is a question I have, that maybe because you've been in so many different places with your own. You can comment. I don't know, but it's
Yeah, no, I actually, I wanted to bring up a couple of points. The first one is shortcuts. Our brains, like if you've ever heard of the motivational triad, right? One of the things that motivates human beings is the economy of energy, right? That we try to always take the path of least resistance, the thing that
mhm,
will, the way to accomplish what we need to accomplish with the least amount of work or energy output. And our brain, we know, we've learned in the last, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years from neuroscience, right, that our neural pathways, what they are pattern recognizers, or that's one of the things that they are, is pattern recognizers. So
right.
what we do is when we experience a situation, we kind of log this pattern in our brain, and then in an effort to conserve energy or take a shortcut, we when we see that pattern again, we immediately believe that whatever it was that we associated with that pattern the first time is the case this time. The problem is that sometimes our interpretation of what we are seeing, the message that's being sent to us, is not necessarily the message that the person who is doing the item or wearing the item is putting out there. So,
Right.
for example, we see a kippah and we think, this is a person who is observant, at least in kosher and Shabbat, right? That this is a person who is Orthodox at some level. But maybe they're wearing the kippah because since October 7th, they want to shout out loud that they're a Jew and they're proud of it, even if they're not actually Orthodox, right? Or, for example, just because a woman is always wearing sleeves that cover her elbow doesn't necessarily mean that it's because she's following a rule of modesty. It could be because she has lost a lot of weight and doesn't like to show her arms because she doesn't like the way they look. Or, and also sometimes there are things that people do, like, because of expectations. Because one of the things that I explained to you is that there are some things about orthodoxy that I don't necessarily believe that are things that God cares about or wants us to do, but I made a choice and a commitment to live within this community, and so there are certain things that are expected of me that I do. So even though sometimes I wear pants, I always wear a long tunic with the pants. I always make sure that everything is modest, at least at some level.
Hmm.
And I always put something on top of my head, whether it's a beret, which like I'm wearing right now, or a large um, headband, which is something that's popular in Israel, but not necessarily in the diaspora. And many Orthodox Jews would say that's not covering your head, so that doesn't
Hmm.
work. But in Israel, a woman covering her head is not about modesty. It's about signifying that she's married. And actually, that was the original intent, but I don't want to get into a Gemara discussion right now.
Next
Um,
time.
yeah, yeah, right. Um, I do not claim to be an expert in halacha, but anyway, my point being that yes, you are correct that the choices that we make in the way that we um, decorate our bodies, cover our bodies, definitely there's a message involved. Not always, right? Sometimes you just throw
Hmm.
on a sweatshirt. Sometimes a
Hmm.
sweatshirt is just a sweatshirt.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, um, part of the problem is that the message I'm presenting may not be the message that you think I'm presenting based on the patterns that your brain has encountered and how it's interpreted it. So, it's a messy business. Just like um, you know, when I was very much more religious and much more self-righteous, I remember somebody saying something to me. There was a woman who was very scantily clad, and she looked at me and she was like, "What are you looking at?"
Hmm.
And I just, I just said, "You, isn't that why you're dressed that way?" And I'm surprised she didn't smack me, and she had a tremendous amount of self-control and walked off, unlike me, who didn't have a tremendous amount of self control and was being very my unfiltered self at the time. But just because somebody is revealing parts of their body that you wouldn't reveal does not necessarily mean they're doing it because they're easy or loose or trying to sell something or give something away. There could be a completely different explanation. and how they interpret the way that they dressed and how you interpret the way that they dressed may be completely different. And I think that that kind of gets around in a very roundabout way to one of the messages that is really, really important to me, and that is the idea that we live in a world of concealment. Nobody has 100% clarity on what is the truth or what is right or what is wrong. Some people think they do, but nobody really does. And so we need to walk this journey of life with giving people the grace to also not have clarity and remembering that if I had walked the journey that they've walked, I might be in exactly the same place that they are at. And so that's like really, I mean, for me, that is the biggest, most important like motivator in my life right now, as far as how I interact with other people, is to be kind and to give the benefit of the doubt wherever it's possible. I mean, obviously, there are some pretty evil and bad people in this world, and so
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you should make yourself vulnerable to to the evil. But if you don't take risks and open yourself up and make yourself vulnerable to the beauty that's in the world, you could be missing out on something absolutely incredible by not getting to know somebody simply because of the way that they dress or where they're holding.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm reminded of the phrase generous assumptions, right? To
Mm,
give people just generous assumptions. To your point, we don't know where people have come from, where they're at. And it's kind of in Hebrew, you can say a bittul, like a self, not nullification, but like this humility, right?
right.
It's a humility to recognize that we're not privy to what is going on in someone else's life completely, and we wouldn't want to be, just like we don't want to be judged. We shouldn't be judging
Exactly.
on some level. I have God's voice in my head right now saying, "I'm." Of course, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's
No.
like, of course, we're supposed to discern and judge, and I think discernment is different than judgment. I think that it is important for us to discern, but to kind of like the Red Roof Inn, leave the light on, right? We'll leave the light on
Right.
for someone. That's a budget motel chain here in the States, and they have the whole we'll
Yeah.
leave the light on for you. And it's just this idea of, again, humility and staying in our lane is kind of something that I'm coming around to, not in a limiting,
Hmm.
constraining, boxing way, but more like what is mine, what is not mine. I am not going to, whether it's with my kids or my husband or whatever, family members, just, and again, it's that going vertical.
Right.
Right. When I find myself going horizontal, I'm like, whoa, 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 let's just rein it back in. And that can also be applied to when I see people, right? If I
Right.
start sensing that I'm getting judgy, I want to reverse that energy and just give it over.
Hmm.
Um, but so how much of this do you think is related to perhaps the times that we're in? Things are a little intense, and it has been for a long time, this idea of dress a certain way or you subscribe to a certain point of view or you're with a certain rabbi or a certain community. And I feel like there's a lot more fluidity right now where you do have people. First of all, the learning is exponential in terms of Torah or in terms of Judaism or in terms of spirituality. Just everything is kind of cracking open. And so, what does that mean to you in terms of the times that we are in, especially post October 7th, with identity and, relationship to God, and then like presenting or doing, or it's kind of a big prompt,
Oh, it's a
but
huge,
I
huge
know.
question, and I don't know that we'll really be able to dig deeply into it, but I do think that, it's interesting. There are a lot of people, and in fact, the Palestinians have even said that the reason that they chose the time that they did was because there was a lot of division in Israel at that time, right? There were a lot of protests going on, and our government was, just Israeli politics were a mess. I mean, Israeli politics are always a mess, but
Yeah.
when it's really hitting the streets and literally like the American Civil War, brother against brother, kind of thing, then the enemy sees this as an opportunity because they know that when we're divided, that we are at our weakest. And since October 7th, I feel like it's all the more important for us to recognize the us in the other. Um, there's a verse in the Tanakh in the book of Micah, chapter 6, verse 8, that says, "What is it that God has told you to do, O man, but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God?" And I feel like if we would all try to do what's right, but to have mercy for others, and most of all, humility, which is something that the internet has practically obliterated. Um, I think that the world would look very different. Um, nobody, I really, I don't, I prefer not to like speculate on how this is all going to finish up and play out as far as Israel or any of that. But I do think like what you were saying about um, a l- I think that the horrific events of October 7th have caused a lot of people to do a lot of self-reflection, and there is a lot more fluidity, as you said. I don't think
Mhm.
there's a lot more acceptance. I would hope that there is. But I definitely know of a lot more people who are actually moving to the left or moving to the right religiously, as far as Jewish observance goes. Um, but what we really need to do is just to recognize the divine spark in each other, and the fact that everybody is in a different place on their journey, and we need to give them the grace to be there where they are without
Mhm.
judgment.
Mhm. Have you been back in the States since October 7th? Do you have any sense of
Um,
what's going on outside of Israel? Any thoughts on that with
not
identity or?
hang on a second. October 7th was a year and a half ago. No, I have not been outside of the United States. I mean, I talk to a lot of people in the United States all the time, and I have my work, all my clients are in America, although most of them are not Jewish. Um, so no, I was there, I was in the States the end of 22
Okay.
last. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so I think, given that the time that we have, I want to stay focused if we can on this question of identity, right? You in your personal experience have gone through, for lack of a better word, let's say different iterations, right? Or different
Mm-hmm.
phases or different,
Sure.
and it's unusual in the sense that most secular Jews don't necessarily go through, embracing Christianity and then Messianic Judaism and then Orthodox Judaism.
Right.
But I'd like to know how that, I mean, it's fascinating for a whole different conversation. But how has that informed where you're at right now? How does that strengthen you? How do you see perhaps your unique journey as a form of divine providence, otherwise known in Hebrew as hashgacha pratit? How does that inform where you're at now?
Oh, that's a hard question to answer. I
You don't
mean,
have to if you don't want to.
as a person, right, as a person who's been open to reconsidering what I believe, I'm always in a place of asking myself uncomfortable questions and also talking to God about, wanting clarity, or at least as much clarity as I'm allowed to have,
Sure.
um, and under wanting to understand better, what is important and what isn't, and but yeah, I mean, there's so many directions we could go with those questions. There was when I stopped being a Christian or Messianic and became an Orthodox Jew, it's kind of like a pendulum swinging that I became an anti-missionary, and I wrote a book about, Jewish answers to the Christian claims. And if somebody was a Christian, I was almost offended by this idea that they were a Christian, and as I've gotten older, and I am older, and I've reconsidered what I believe, and tried to look at the bigger picture. Um, I realized that I no longer feel threatened
Mm,
by people having a different belief system than I do, right? When I became Orthodox, I was threatened by it. And we could kind of, launch into what was I threatened by? Why was I threatened by it or whatever? But the fact is that I was because I was angry. And now that I've kind of come out the other side and I've come to the opinion that every religious system was manufactured as a framework for to provide a structure for people within a certain group to worship God and to relate to God and to relate to each other. And so, kind of seeing things from this direction, I've come to appreciate that there's a lot of truth in a lot of different paths. I may or may not, I'm not going to answer the question definitively, but I may or may not believe that Judaism has the largest amount of truth, but there's a lot that I've come across that I feel is not true, or is not what, I mean, how can anybody know what God's intention was for something or, what God feels about something? But, um, so So where I'm at now, I suppose, is a place actually where I'm not threatened by anybody's beliefs, whether it's to the right of me, the left of me, ahead of me, or behind me, um, because I'm actually okay being in a place of just wanting to have a relationship with God and not knowing, not knowing. Like I know a lot, right? I know I've studied for 24 years. I know a lot, but the place of not knowing is a place that a lot of people are scared to be. Most people want to know, they want the answers, and that's normal human desire. But when I started looking at things and saying, okay, but this doesn't make sense in the context of this, and this doesn't make sense for me in the context of that, and that does make sense. Um, but one time I was talking with my husband, and he said something about I'm struggling, and I said, actually, I'm not struggling. Um, I'm trying to learn, and I'm open, and I spend a lot of time talking and connecting with the creator, but it's not a struggle because I finally become okay with the things that I don't know with a capital K, so to speak,
okay, so I want to stay for a minute, if we can, on what you talked about with being before it was this feeling of being threatened, anger. I'm guessing underneath that is fear. And
Sure.
so now you got to a place where you're okay not knowing,
Hmm.
or just being open and not needing to have that certainty with a capital C in what you've committed to or signed up for, right? And
Right.
so can you talk a little bit about how you got there? Because I think so much of the challenge that we have as a Jewish community, as a larger global community, with all the challenges we have, is this need for certainty, this need to be right. I don't want to get into power struggles or anything like that, but just this idea of being open and being and allowing for the possibility that you don't have all the answers. So there's ego in a lot
Mm.
of this as
Yeah.
well. And how much
Yeah.
of that has informed, let's say, the older structures of different levels of religiosity, and how much is are we getting into? I keep feeling like we're getting to a new place where those boundaries and those structures are going to be, let's say, less and less important if we're instead working more on our connection directly to
Hmm.
God, and how that is for each person. So, can you comment on that, and
I
how you
mean, I
got
can
from, yeah.
I can comment on it, but I'm gonna have to say something that is funny because it harkens back to one time when I was on a speaking tour, and somebody asked me a question about how, like, she's got the duty part down, but how do you get the love part down, the spiritual
Mm,
part? And I said, I cannot answer that. I am a naturally spiritual person, and I cannot tell you how to get that because it comes very naturally for me. And in the same way, like, okay, When I went from Christianity to Judaism, I was confronted head on with the fact that some of the things I believed were not true.
You mean believed
But
as a Christian?
as a Christian, right?
Hmm.
Because the rabbi that I spoke with, wasn't a rabbi, but he said, "But this doesn't say this in the Hebrew. This doesn't mean this. This isn't what you think this is this, but it isn't. Look at this here." And so I was forced to come to terms with the fact that I didn't know everything and that there might be other information out there that I hadn't considered that might elucidate what is actual truth. Once you've had that experience, you are always, or you should be always open. Again, there's a lot of ego in there. And
Hmm.
um, how do I put into words how I was able to let go of that ego? I don't know, maybe through just growing and trying always to become a bigger, better person. But having already gone through the experience, the very painful, I might add, experience of
Yeah.
realizing that everything that I had believed for 17 years was a lie, um, it puts you in a place of being open to the fact that you might not be right. And that's very hard when you're a smart person. It's an issue I have with my family. I have 4 children who are all geniuses. And the argument, I mean, they love each other, but some of them can't even be around each other because when you are a person who is right 99% of the time and you come in contact with another person who's right 99% of the time and they don't agree with you, well, how can you reconcile that, right? Like how do you deal with that? So it's hard to put that ego down and say, you know what? It is possible that I don't have all the information or that the perspective I'm seeing from is not correct. But once I got there, and again, I don't know the formula, I just did.
Hmm.
Then I was able to put myself in the position of many different people and to say, okay, let's play with this as a like an experiment, like take this idea and disengage it from anything that has to do with who I am and let me look at it and okay, it's round, it's blue, it's hard, it's cold, it's whatever it is, and none of that has anything to do with who I am as a person, my worth, my value, my integrity, my intelligence, or anything. And so the ability to take a concept and look at it that way, apart from identity, it takes away the threat,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, I think that part of it, to my understanding and experience, is when your identity is wrapped up in what you know, or what you've accomplished, or who you know, or how many followers you have, or what you've done, or what other people say about you, or that's, that award you got at work, or whatever, then anything that is going to counter those demarcations or, proof points of your value, right? I think on some
Hmm.
level it comes to who am I? So it's ego for sure. It's also just like, this is what I know. So for example, I think that there's been a lot, not for everyone, but a lot of people have been, it's like a religion of a different sort, let's say with the American Jewish population's relationship to the Democratic Party, right? So
Hmm.
you have some who have been traumatized and shocked by certain things that have happened, especially since October 7th, and others who have dug their heels in, if you will, and are, because their identity is related to the party as opposed to their any kind of affinity for Israel or the Jewish people necessarily. That might be a little bit of a spicy statement, but I'm sticking to it. But I
Hmm.
think that it's for me, my change from more ego based and judgment was totally dependent on my coming into a relationship with God of my own understanding, right? And
Right.
that is a process, and that is a painful process, and that is a process that is ongoing for the rest of my life. But I think that, it's what enables us to see the other is if you
Hmm.
understand that you're saying, I'm seeing one facet of this, I'm seeing one angle of this, and there's something else I can't even see, but I'm going to allow for the possibility that there's stuff I'm not I'm not supposed to see or capable of seeing right now. But if so, there's a saying, "Ein od milvado,"
Mm.
right? Which means there's nothing but God. There's nothing but universe. There's nothing but energy. However, the listener wants to understand it. But when that becomes an embodied belief statement, and I see it as the opposite of a limiting belief, it's like a completely empowering belief. Even if you
Sure.
don't believe in God, even if you're struggling with God, what does that mean? What does God want? But if you have this spiritual alignment, so you mentioned this person going from duty to how do they get that spiritual? And it's
Yeah.
it's it's about faith, it's about trust, emuna bitachon, and it's a practice because you have to practice it. So for me, it was a rational decision that my life is going to be better, I think, if I
Mm.
play around with this idea of a higher power,
Mm.
because the self-help, self-work, Tony Robbins world, that I lived in for many, many years, the rational part, the very masculine business energy, only obviously I'm a Gen Xer, like only took me so far. And then like, the world, the universe, the life is gonna, oh, you're so cute, Alana. You think that's it? I'm gonna show you something else, and all those tools aren't gonna help you, or you're gonna
Yeah.
get to the point. So I think that we're now
Yeah.
seeing this on a larger scale where more people are looking for some kind of connection and something to kind of breathe into. And for some, it's politics or a political party, and for some, it's identity, and for some, it's God.
Buying an RV. Yeah. Um,
I know we're gonna have to save that for another talk, just because that's gonna be
okay.
you can hint,
Yeah.
yeah, we can go there. But anything you want to reflect on my little rant?
Oh, your little rant. No, it just made me think about that's one of the things that once I was exposed to the idea that there's a God, it, yes, the way that I related to God and to community looked different, and it is still looks different. It's always changing. And um, anybody who sees the video of me is going to immediately say she doesn't look anything like she looked 5 years ago. And it's not just age, but Um, where was I going with that?
I was,
For
yeah.
me, yeah, no, for me, just like I said, I don't know how to go from duty to spiritual because I naturally have connected from the moment I first discovered the idea of of God, right? Considered it, not that I hadn't heard, but considered it.
Mm-hmm.
It was the connection was there. Like I said, it looked different at different times, and it's been different throughout my life. But in the same way, I even though I don't think a lot of what passes as religious, duty today is what the creator actually cares about in our lives. One of the things that has never wavered is that the world was created, we were created with intelligent design, that there is something, whether you want to call it God or the universe, whether you see it as this kind of person who is um, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, or whether you see it as the universe, and for some reason that we can't understand, the universe has intelligence. It's really just semantics because and that's separate from somebody who thinks that maybe there was no intelligence in design and there is no God. But for me, this is something that makes sense. And even like, okay, we're going to need to talk another time about this journey that we're about, this epic adventure we're about to embark on. But literally, from the moment that we decided we were going to do it, it's like being on a roller coaster, and you get to the top, you're going clunk, 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 right? And then you
Yeah.
get to the top, and all of a sudden it's like, whee! And you have two choices. You can either white knuckle the bar on the roller coaster seat, or you can just put your hands in the air and be like, okay, I don't like the way this feels, but I'm gonna embrace it anyway, like it's happening so quickly. And every single door, we even doors are opened for us without us even like knocking on them. And
Amazing.
there is no way to explain it other than that uh, my desire to do this is in alignment with whatever it is that the universe has for us to do.
Amazing. So to that point, you've been married for a number of years. Your kids,
37. Yeah,
Okay,
it's a
so,
number.
and you've gone through the changes in, as an individual with your place of belief and everything. How, this could be a whole nother conversation, but how do you stay married? How do
Oh,
you manage, not stay married, but like, how do you manage, right? You marry someone when you're
mhm.
at point A, let's say, and you're
Yeah.
holding where you're holding when you marry this person, and then life happens and we evolve and we change and spiritually. So how, what can you share with, we the listeners that could be helpful maybe for those of us who feel like I've been in this relationship for so long. I'm not the same person that I was. To your point, I don't want to be the same person I was
Right.
17 years ago because then I haven't grown. But how have you found it, the ability to stay together? I'm assuming happily
Yes.
enough
Yes.
that,
No, very happily, actually. It's
yes.
funny you asked that. Just last week, so every Friday morning, my husband and I go out for breakfast. Now, when we were counseling, doing marriage counseling, and we would always tell the young people that it's really important that they have a date night. And, even though they may think that they can't afford the time or the money, that it's really, really important, especially as children come along and all of that. But even afterwards, spending time together is really important. So put that aside for a second.
Hmm.
We're getting older and we're exhausted in the evenings, and trying to do date night just doesn't work for us because we're both like, nah, never mind. All I want to do is eat chocolate and watch TV. So we decided instead that we were going to have date breakfast every Friday morning. Friday in Israel is like a Sunday in America. And so it turns out we go to the same bagel place every week. And last week, this lady, she goes there, I guess, to get coffee also every Friday morning, but just to get coffee and leave. And she says, I have a question. I always see you, like, are you two married? She says, because the two of you are always so happy. I see you together and I'm just wondering, like, I said, yeah, we're married. And she says, like, do you guys ever fight? And I said, well, okay. It wouldn't be normal if we didn't disagree. We definitely disagree and we sometimes argue, but we never fight. And I think that that's like an important piece of the puzzle, is that throughout the years, each of us has always been in the place where we want to be better. And we've always been open to, if my spouse is saying something, is criticizing me about something. Of course, first of all, you have to start off by not trying to criticize in a way that feels like an attack.
Hmm.
They say that communication is the cornerstone of a good relationship. It really is. But also that the both of us are always trying to be better people. And obviously, we sometimes miss the mark. But when you know that your partner is truly a good person. I mean, there's lots and lots of other things that I can share about focusing, because what you think about, you get more of. And so focusing on a person's good aspects will help those become bigger. And the bad things that we tend to start to focus on, which would become smaller because we're focusing on the good things. But also, when you know that the person, whether it's your spouse or any other person, right, even a relative,
Hmm.
when you try to see their heart and try to understand that they're not doing this because they want to be, they want to make your life miserable, or that, it's not out of malice. It allows you to see who they are at their core, and it changes the dynamics of the relationship. And so, really, in many ways, the secret is to always try to become better and always try to be kind to the other person. And if you can do that, like when I've spoken to my husband, and I have a really sharp tongue, sometimes I can be really mean. Um, and I realized that I was being mean. I
Mm.
will actually go back to him and say, I am so sorry I said that. I was feeling this way, or I was stuck in this place, or I was doing this, or I was doing that. Can we talk through what was going on and what is going on, and see how we can make this better? And so the both of us have been willing to work and put in the work, and really the bottom line to a good marriage, is to remember that it's 100%, 100%, not 50-50, so that when
Hmm.
one of us is not quite getting there, the other person can meet them, and to be kind.
Hmm. And can you bring in the spiritual journey aspect here?
There have been, look, it's not been easy, I mean, when one person starts making spiritual changes and the other person, especially my husband, is not like me, as far as like being this person who's always asking questions and always wondering and stuff like that. He's one of those people who, when he finds the truth after being dragged, across the floor to see it, he says, okay, this is the truth now. I'm going to build my house and settle in, and I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, but this time around, I mean, the when we went from Christianity to Judaism, it was not an easy time in our marriage, and I wasn't
Sorry,
sure our
just to
marriage was.
just to ask Penina, you met
Yeah.
your husband when you were a Christian?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was a pastor.
Oh, wow.
Not he didn't have his own congregation, but he had
Yeah,
gone to
yeah.
Bible college and all of that. And we went through this, yeah, together. I mean, I came back to Judaism 4 years before he decided to convert, which again is a whole nother story. That's why I wrote a
Yes.
book.
Okay. Which we'll
But
include in the links.
Um, yeah, that buy it on Kindle. It's easier to get. I have an issue with my books being in America and me being here and not being able to
Sure.
ship things. So,
We'll put the Kindle link.
okay,
So,
sounds good.
but for for anyone who, it may be for a couple who's listening or a person who's listening, it's a philosophical disagreement, or maybe
Hmm.
you're realizing that you share some values, but the priority of some values is weighted more for your spouse than for you. And any kind of, communication, to your point, very important, but
Don't be
you
threatened. The important thing is don't be
Mhm.
threatened by their difference in beliefs. Because that is the key to breaking up the marriage is that if you're threatened by what they believe, then everything they say is going to be an attack. And if it's an attack, then all you can do is put up a wall, and everything you say is going to be an attack for them, and they're going to put up a wall, and you're not going to get anywhere, and that's going to destroy the marriage. So if you don't be threatened by the fact that you're in a different place than they are, then you can communicate in a way that is full of understanding and can help them understand. And you can, I hate the phrase, but agree to disagree.
Okay, would you say then that it could be a limiting belief some people have if they feel that it's like a deal breaker if they believe different things, or if they value different things, that it's not necessarily a deal breaker, but people maybe assume it is, like, oh, if I believe X, or I've changed and now I believe Y, and my spouse believes X, then that's a sign we're not supposed to be together and it needs to end. Have you
It's
seen that?
not,
Or yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, I understand that way of seeing things. And obviously, there are some belief systems that are so encompassing that if your partner isn't on the same path with you, it will be nearly impossible. But there's a lot more room for
Mm-hmm.
understanding and sharing and being able to walk parallel paths together even though they're a little different. You can be in two different places if you're willing to listen and understand and not be threatened, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the differences I see now. My husband isn't where I am spiritually. It's there we're in very different places, but there's so much more that goes into our relationship than just
Right.
our religion.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when I came from Christianity to Judaism, his different belief was threatening to me, and my different belief was threatening to him. And our marriage almost didn't survive, but it
Sure.
did. Um, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's really helpful. So, what I'd love to hear in the few minutes we have left, and I would love to have you come back if you're willing to talk some more. Can you tell us a little bit about your upcoming adventure? And yeah, if you can tell us a little bit about the upcoming adventure, please.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for asking. My husband and I have bought an RV in Israel. It's called a caravan on wheels. It's little. It's a 24-foot trailer, 26, I can't remember, and it's 600 and no, it's 593 centimeters, whatever that is. And we are going to be traveling around Israel and kind of discovering this beautiful country that we live in. And, we're in the process of just getting rid of 90% of our possessions so that we can do this and have experienced that freedom of not being tied down to things, but rather to have experiences in life. And that's really our goal going forward. We're older, but we're not retired yet. We're still working full time, and but both of us work remotely, so there's no reason why we can't do that from the caravan. And yeah, it our focus is going to change. And even though the caravan is small, the whole world is huge, and there's no reason why we can't live outside of those four walls on wheels.
That's
So,
beautiful. Now, just for those who aren't familiar, Israel is the size of like
New
Delaware,
Jersey,
New Jersey.
New
Like it's,
Jersey, yeah.
yeah, it's a small country. So
Mhm.
at this point, I don't know if Sinai is even an option, probably not, but like it's really within the limits of Israel. But for those who don't know, Israel has such diverse flora, fauna areas. So
Yeah,
yeah, you can get the snow up in the north, right
yeah,
in the Golan, and then you've got the green, and then you've got the hills and the desert and down to the Red Sea. So do you have a
yeah.
starting plan of where with the weather or seasons? Like what's the first kind of
So the first
part?
thing we're going to do, once we're done with our apartment, moved out of our apartment, which we're going to be before Shavuot, which is crazy. That's the end of May.
Yeah,
It's really crazy. I told you, like, it's like all these doors just
been
opened up
busy.
and I'm just holding. I decided not to white knuckle the bars. I just got my hands in the air and I'm like, okay, whatever's happening, I'm into it. We actually got permission in our community to have a small patch of land where we can park. So the first month, we're just going to get used to living in the caravan and be parked in our community. And then our plan is to spend most of the summer right up north, going to, yes, the Golan, the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee area. And then, we'll probably do that and come back a bit. We're used to being three sets of our kids live in the area. So,
Okay.
um, we'll be coming back a lot so that we can still see them because we have 13 grandchildren. So,
Kind of
um,
horror.
yeah,
Amazing. Thank
we don't
God.
want to lose our connection with them.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to reach out?
Okay, so the best way if they actually want to reach out, is to email me at peninataylor@gmail.com. If you want to follow our journey, we have a Facebook page. It's called Taking the High Road, CHAI, Taking the High Road.
And
I
high
also
means life. Yeah.
Yes, life, right. And we also have an Instagram page called Taking the High Road. And we haven't done a video yet. We've just had a few posts so far. But when we receive our caravan in a week and a half, we will be creating our first video. And so we'll have a YouTube channel, and our website's not done yet, so don't go look there, but it's Taking the High Road.
Amazing.
So yeah,
Amazing, amazing. Penina, I know it's late where you are. I so appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on. I would love
my
to have you come
pleasure.
back, and I hope all goes well with the decluttering, downsizing, and shifting over. Happy Passover. This will be
You too.
published after Pesach, but happy and kosher Passover, and thank you again so much.
Thank you. You too. It was really fun having this conversation. I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to talk, and I'm looking forward to more.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Me too.
Bye.
Well, I hope you got something out of this conversation. I know listening to it again, I certainly did. Really, really great wisdom here. And thanks again to Penina for coming on the show. So, folks, if you are someone who is interested in coming on to have a raw DMC with me, I'd love to hear from you. Again, all you need is the desire to share your story, your experience, your message of your own truly great life and how you are pursuing that and striving for that and whatever that means for you with a larger audience. So reach on out to me at trulygreatlife.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and, of course, YouTube. So hope to hear from you. And if you think there's someone in your life who would benefit from this conversation, please share it. Please subscribe. Please like and all that fun social media stuff that I'm still figuring out because we only learn by doing. Am I right? By doing, reflecting, doing, reflecting, doing, reflecting. And that is part of what this conversation and these raw DMCs are all about. So if nothing else, I hope you get your own inspiration and courage to take risks, whether it's risks like what Penina was talking about, or risks like I'm discussing here with trying something new. And I hope you are all well, and see you on the next one.